In today's episode of Unpacking Possibility, we will talk about something that sounds like science fiction, but it's not. It is how researchers at MD Anderson Cancer Center conducted a groundbreaking study, finding that a type of energy healing had measurable and significant benefits on pancreatic cancer. Really intriguing, super exciting, and hopeful news. I can't wait to tell you a little bit more about it. And by the end of the episode, you'll also learn a very simple exercise that can help you learn to sense your own energy field and other people's as well. It's kind of a fun thing to do with a friend. So if you give that a try, I hope you let me know if any of this sounds interesting to you. If you're intrigued, stay tuned. So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein, as always. I'm so happy to be here with you. Today we're going to talk about something, again, it sounds like science fiction, but it isn't. And it's really remarkable that MD Anderson Cancer Center, one of the best cancer centers in the world, decided to study a type of biofield therapy, specifically the Bengston healing method, otherwise known as a type of energy healing. They wanted to look at whether this would influence pancreatic cancer cell growth and metastasis. And they did this in cell and animal models. They found some incredible benefit, and their findings were published in the journal Cancer Medicine. So the researchers at University of Texas, MD Anderson Cancer Center, found that the biofield therapy they studied, which was the Bengston healing method, reliably and significantly slowed the growth and spread of pancreatic cancer in preclinical models. Now, just so you know, preclinical models means in vitro and in animal models, so mice in this case. But it's remarkable because pancreatic cancer, as you may know, if you've known anyone who's actually gone through pancreatic cancer, and treatment, it's one of the most, unfortunately, it's one of the most lethal type of cancers because usually by the time it's discovered, it's more advanced. And once pancreatic cancer has metastasized or moved to other parts of the body, your 12-month survival rate is on average around 10%, which is not high. Now, that doesn't mean that some people don't do better. They do, but generally. So it's so important to explore what other things might be helpful in treating pancreatic cancer, treating patients with pancreatic cancer. So basically what the team did is they did repeated studies, both with the cells and with mice. And they also used patient-derived tumor organoids in vitro. So basically what that means is they took tumors from human patients and looked at those cells as well. But the biofield therapy, the energy healing therapy that they used in the study, reduced cancer metastasis to the liver by more than 50%. That is amazing. And the researchers said these effects were comparable to the effects they might see with chemotherapy, but without the toxic side effects. And what they said is biofield therapies, or this biofield therapy, the Bengston method, appear to influence cancer at a fundamental level, including cellular energy systems, electrical signaling, and gene regulation pathways. So one thing that's worth noting about this study is that because the experiments were conducted in cell cultures and animal models, the findings demonstrate the effects of the energy healing independent of any possible placebo effects, right? Because we assume that in mice and in cell cultures, there's no expectation of benefit from getting a sham treatment like sham energy healing. So healing by somebody who's not a trained energy healer, right? In a human being, if we believe we're getting an active treatment, there's a certain percentage of people who will get somewhat better. And so we always want to see if the active treatment is better than no treatment or a placebo. So the team is continuing to do research in this area, and that's a great thing, really important, because we want to know more, and the more we know, the more empowered we can be. But so intriguing and so important. Now, before we go on, I want to just say a few quick things. One, of course, you know that this is educational and not medical advice. You should always talk with your own healthcare team if you're dealing with an illness or you have any questions. But again, it's worth being informed. This can help us decide what other kind of potential approaches we want to add to our healing toolbox. And I think that's great. Now, I want to talk about this research also in the context of other research about energy healing, not the Bengston method necessarily, although in some cases we will talk a little bit about that. But the reason for that is that we could kind of crudely split the world into two camps when it comes to energy healing. And one group would be the group that says energy healing is real. I've observed a benefit either in myself or in other people. I know that a lot of people who listen to this podcast are, in fact, quite open to a variety of approaches to healing. But understandably, there are many other people who are not open to the idea of energy healing being a real thing. I mean, we're looking at it. We're not seeing anything different. We may be seeing somebody who looks like they're meditating or has their hands over someone's body or a hand resting on someone's arm or someone's leg or someone's head and so forth. It doesn't really look like anything's happening. And so a lot of times, unfortunately, people who don't know that there is quite a bit of research into energy healing, and of course more continues, will say, well, there's no evidence that it works. Now, I'm not advocating for anybody to abandon their conventional treatment. Again, for any other approach, that's not for me to decide, and that's not even the purpose of this. But I do want people to understand that for quite some time, there's been a lot of thought that there is something happening when someone has the intention to heal another. So before we get going, I want to also just quickly define biofield therapy because I mentioned that earlier on. That is the research or academic umbrella term for energy healing. It was coined, probably back in the 90s when the National Institutes of Health first had an Office of Alternative Medicine that grew into becoming a center, which is now the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. But it really helps to have a clear term so that everybody can agree if they're studying a type of therapy or approach, everybody knows what it is. So it's good to have a neutral kind of term to study these phenomena. And I also think probably people were looking for something that was a little more precise and less woo-woo in terms of the language. There actually are a lot of different types of energy healing. We'll talk about the research for some of them, but many of you will be familiar with things like Reiki, a type of healing that I was going to say a kind of hands-on healing, but actually you don't even need to be physically present to do it. Another one is healing touch and therapeutic touch. Healing touch actually, I believe, if I remember correctly, requires about 4 years of training. And there's an academic flavor to the structure of those programs. You have to do continuing education and so forth. So there's a lot more to it than simply intending, although there may very well be benefit to intending for another. But energy healing, people have been talking about this since way, way back. If we think about laying on of hands generally, that is probably millennia old. People laying their hands on another, whether while they're praying or not, but again, intending for the healing of another. The father of Western medicine, Hippocrates, centuries ago, said that certain individuals appear to be able to heal. And he described this as the force which flows from many people's hands. So this was based on his own observation. There was pioneering work in the 1950s and 60s by the late biologist Bernard Grad, who was at McGill University. But Grad actually, his studies are very interesting to read. And if you were ever kind of finding yourself with a little free time on your hands on a rainy, kind of cold day like it is today in the Northeast, you might want to look up some of Bernard Grad's research. But just to quickly summarize, he found that selected healers, not everybody, there's probably a range of ability like there is for the ability to play the piano. Most people can play it, but not everybody's going to be Chopin. I think that's probably the case for just about everything. But anyway, Bernard Grad found that selected healers could influence the germination of plant seeds. They could also influence the growth rate of plants and the curing of seeds that had been shocked by a saline solution. Pretty interesting stuff. And it actually, some of these things are things you could do at home. Have two sets of plant seeds that you're planting in soil and watering, maybe keep them in separate rooms, and intend for the growth and health of one plant, one set of seeds every day, and see if there's a difference in the growth rate between that and the plants that are just kind of tended to but not intended for. Bernard Grad was also able to measure the ability of healers to reduce goiters and stimulate wound healing in mice. So, I feel bad for the mice, but just to describe it, mice would be given wounds experimentally and then watched to see, did the ones that received energy healing heal faster? And in fact, they did. So other research was done by Dan Benor, who did a range of experimental studies, but he discussed the healing action of energy healing on enzymes, on fungi and yeasts, on bacteria, on a variety of plants, single-celled organisms, and animals as well. And he did controlled studies on all of these and more. Other researchers looked at dose-response effects for approaches like therapeutic touch, among others. But they looked at the effect of this type of energy healing and others on human cells like tendon cells and bone cells. Now, what's interesting about this is that not all types of cells responded equally well to different types of energy healing, but they were able to observe that and record their findings. But this is really just a quick overview of energy healing research. There's a lot more out there. We're talking about energy healing. We're talking about the groundbreaking MD Anderson Cancer Center study with energy healing and pancreatic cancer. And we're talking more now about the specific approach used in that study, the Bengston healing method. So again, it's a type of biofield therapy. So I want to talk a little bit about Bill Bengston, who pioneered the approach, the research he did, and a little bit about what it looks like. I've also invited one of the energy healers who was a practitioner on the MD Anderson study to come on the show. I'll let you know what happens. Sometimes people can make time to do it and sometimes they can't. But Bill Bengston, if you ever have, again, free time and you want to look him up, he was a very interesting guy, super smart, very humorous, a Long Islander, love the accent. It just reminds me of home because, as some of you may know, that is where I was born. But somebody who had a very successful, conventional research career and teaching career, academic career, but also was very intrigued by the study of energy healing. This is not something he was originally interested in at all. An encounter with someone who was doing energy healing kind of, I don't want to say randomly, but without really a well thought out model, and was having a lot of success way back in the day, is what put this on Bill Bengston's radar. And what he did is he took the method and kind of refined it and really applied the scientific method to understanding this. He was not somebody who was an energy healing evangelist. He really wanted to know if it worked, how it worked, when it would work, when it wouldn't work, why it worked. And not all of those questions are answerable. But basically, the method came about 45 years ago. So when Bill Bengston, I think it was even before he went to graduate school, might have been the summer before, I think he was working as a lifeguard at a local community pool. And someone that he met there just was an incredible natural energy healer. Didn't know how it worked, didn't really question it. But Bengston, again, because he had such a curious and scientific mind, wanted to know more. He tells the story in more detail in his book of how he got into doing this. So I'm going to refer you to The Energy Cure, which is a really fascinating, well-written and engaging book. It's Bengston's book. You can get it on Amazon. But Bengston began, after working with the healer and kind of unintentionally doing the healing himself through a series of events, he decided he wanted to further develop and refine the model and understand what was going on. So now we're probably in about the mid to late 1970s. So Bengston began looking for colleagues to help him study this healing phenomenon. And the work that I mentioned before the break about Bernard Grad's experiments with energy healing, with cells and yeasts and animals, this is what Bengston wanted to base his research on. So he hooked up with two professors at the Queen's College, David Crinsley and Marvin Wasserman, and they investigated the effects of the healing techniques that Bengston was developing on various biological models widely used in conventional research. So they looked at specifically mice that had been engrafted with a specific type of mammary carcinoma cell line. And the reason that they did this is because normally when mice were engrafted with this particular cancer cell line, no matter what drugs they were given, no matter what you did to them, they basically died within 27 days. By day 27, 100% of the mice had died, and nothing had ever changed that. So Bengston's feeling was that if any improvement is seen, if there are any mice alive at 27 days, first of all, it'll be groundbreaking. I don't even think he believed it would really happen, but it would demonstrate that, yes, in fact, there was an effect. And it would be quite an important effect. So anyway, fast forward, the engrafted mice developed tumors within 14 days, which was as expected. Around day 21, the tumors in the mice who were receiving the Bengston energy healing method, as opposed to fake energy healing by people not trained to do it or left alone, around day 21, the tumors that appeared in the mice started to ulcerate, which looked terrifying and scary. And by the way, he felt quite bad for the mice. I don't blame him. What's remarkable is that between day 28 and 25, these tumors were resorbed into the mice until the mice achieved full remission. So two incredible things happened. One, a number of mice achieved full remission. That is amazing. But just the fact that they survived past day 27. So at day 35, never happened before. Several mice were alive. So the other thing that's pretty remarkable about the Bengston method experiments were that they used inexperienced people, skeptical faculty members and student volunteers. He trained these people for 6 weeks in the Bengston method and then directed them to place their hands around the mice cages for about an hour per day while practicing his mental technique, image cycling. Now, image cycling is described in more detail in the book. It's not something I can do justice to here, but basically, and he didn't know why it worked, by the way. I don't know if anybody knows why this works. I'm going to try and give a quick overview, but again, if we can get a Bengston energy healer to come on the show and describe it better, I would love that. But basically, Bengston said you had to come up with at least 20 things that you really wanted. And they had to be selfish. It couldn't be, and they had to be specific as well. So you couldn't say, I want world peace. Or you couldn't say, I want to be wealthy. World peace is not selfish, and wanting to be wealthy is not specific. So in his case, it would be something like, if you want a red Ferrari, I'm making this up, but that's what you should visualize. If you want to be successful at some thing you're working on. Maybe it would be imagining yourself toasting someone with a glass of champagne and so forth. Maybe you want to be swimming in your new pool and you're going to really feel how great it feels to jump in that cool water on a hot day. But he said you had to have like 20 of these things, and you had to rapidly mentally cycle through all of these images faster and faster so that you're almost barely consciously noticing each individual image. Again, I don't personally understand why it works, but it did. And again, inexperienced people who are absolutely honest about saying, I don't believe this is possible, still wound up being effective healers. And there were other studies as well. Again, I'll refer you to the book, but it's pretty remarkable. And the reason I like talking about these things on this podcast is because, again, there's so much more out there, I think, than any of us really can fully explain. There's so much more out there that might be beneficial. And let me tell you something. If placing your hands on your energy centers and simply having the belief that you were channeling universal healing energy was all you were doing, let's just say it wasn't a real phenomenon, even though it seems to be that it is, that alone, as we know, with positive expectancy, the expectation that there's a benefit, there's a likelihood that you would activate some sort of innate healing mechanism. Again, that's what the placebo is. It's an innate healing that happens because of your positive expectation of benefit in something, from something. So that would be enough for me, honestly. If it did nothing other than calm you down or ease physical pain, would be great. By the way, calming yourself down also has other effects on your immune system because we know that stress worsens your immune system. So I think it's complicated or complex anyway, and I think there are multiple factors involved in healing. I don't know when or if we'll ever have all of the answers, but it's really pretty amazing. So I'm gonna tell you 2 anecdotes about energy healing, and one is going to offer you something you can try tonight at home, if you like, just to sense your own energy field. And I didn't invent it. I'm passing it on. That's something I learned from somebody else years ago. It's super simple, but it's kind of a cool thing to do. You can teach your friends. So the first anecdote is that many, many years ago, as some people know, I ran a small research program in integrative medicine. And the last day I was working there, this was a place where energy healers were allowed to come into the OR when people were having heart surgery. And there was a woman, a female patient, who had said she wanted that. By the way, this was extremely controversial then. Lots of people did not want people being allowed to be anywhere in the operating room during a surgery, and I get it. But in this situation, they were allowed, and the energy healer that this person wanted to come up actually could not make it up that day. And so I had been trained in Reiki. I had had the attunements several times, but I wasn't a practicing and certainly not a professional Reiki practitioner. But I said, you know what, I'll do it. I mean, it seemed like it couldn't be worse than having nothing. So I went into the room actually with a colleague, and we both, in our own way, just intended for the positive healing for this patient who was anesthetized on the table and who was having coronary artery bypass surgery. So during this time, the patient was not only on the table being operated on, and we were at the perimeter of the room doing, sending our energy healing, but the patient was listening to Belruth Naprostak's successful surgery audio tape. So it was probably a cassette tape or a CD player with that audio program, which you can still get. Now it's at Hay House. It's fantastic and very helpful recording. But I'm familiar with the script, and there's a point where Belruth directs people to envision a protective cocoon of energy, and that the people in the OR are loving professionals, very caring, and working for this person's greatest healing. So anyway, there was a point where, I mean, I don't know if we were in there an hour maybe, but there was a point where in the middle of intending for and praying for and sending healing intention to this woman on the table, I could very clearly see what looked like an oblong dome of energy over the body of this woman, the living body of this woman. And I kept thinking, is this just from the lights in the room? Is this tired eyes? What is this? And I would look away and it was still there. And I remembered that there was a point in the imagery where Bell Ruth says something about a protective cocoon of energy, but I certainly hadn't expected to see it. Now remember, this is a patient under anesthesia, for all intents and purposes, unconscious, but yet the consciousness of this patient, I'm sure, was very aware of the beautiful imagery and affirmations she was hearing on some level, or that were playing in her ears. And I think it was a combination of that and the energy we were sending. I think sending energy also opened up our own fields to perceive energy more clearly. But it was really pretty amazing. And I turned to the person next to me and asked, can you see that? And she did. Can I say exactly what it was? I can't. I can tell you what I think it was. I think she was in this possibly self-generated cocoon of beautiful energy. I think that absolutely our energy was loving in its intention and healing in its intention. So who knows? And you know what? I don't need to know exactly what was going on to be able to just describe what I perceived. But it was kind of an incredible way to kind of end my tenure there before moving on. So that's the anecdote. Now, the technique is something I also learned during my time there. So we had a Qigong master, Jeff Zimmerman, who is extremely skilled. He is in Connecticut. I think he's in Westport. You can Google him. But he's a Qigong master. His energy is probably among the most palpable that I've ever experienced by far from any energy healer. And I do feel people's energy, and I do see people's energy sometimes. But one of the things he said is a way to feel your own energy field. So this is the thing you can try at home, is to put your, pick an arm, and you could even do this while you're sitting down at a table if you want to make it easier. But allow your arm to rest with your pinky towards the tabletop or wherever you're sitting, or on your leg or whatever, and your thumb on the top, the part of your arm that's closer to the sky, basically, or the ceiling. And the point from your thumb to your shoulder is the lung meridian, which he said is much easier to perceive, and I think that's actually true. So take your other hand, not the arm that's resting on the table, but your other hand, and go a few inches above your thumb and just kind of move it back and forth. And you can move it down the length of your thumb, up your forearm, to your shoulder, and back down. And what you may notice is that even from a few inches away, you may feel heat or cool. You can feel tingling. It feels like static electricity to me. And what's even more interesting is that you may feel, as you move your hand a little bit, not enough to create a breeze. I mean, you could even hold your hand steady if you want to test that out. But you may find that even as your hand is over your thumb, you might feel that static electricity radiating all the way up to your shoulder. And you can just move it back and forth and feel that. It's just so interesting. And you'll probably also feel something in the palm of your other hand, right? The hand that's kind of moving over your arm. But what's even more interesting is you can do that and feel someone else's energy field that way. And so give that a try. I mean, obviously somebody who says yes to it, but your partner or your friend can do this little energy feeling experiment with you. I just find it really interesting. But again, I think there's so much more to us in our world than we might imagine. And I hope what we've talked about today is something that you can take in whatever way feels most right to you, and decide if if this is something you would want to add to your healing toolbox. But if you try this energy healing experiment, or if you start practicing energy work or receiving energy from somebody and so forth, let me know what you think. I'm really curious. So I almost forgot to mention 2 additional but related things to the topics we covered in this episode. The first is if you are interested in learning more about some of the energy healing methods I mentioned during this episode, specifically Reiki, Therapeutic Touch, and Healing Touch, as well as finding information on where you can learn even more and find a qualified practitioner, you might want to check out my award-winning book, The Everything Guide to Integrative Pain Management. It came out a little while ago now, but most of the content is still actually quite current and relevant. You'll also learn other tools, complementary and conventional, mostly complementary, like you'll learn information on dietary supplements and approaches like chiropractic and acupuncture, massage, yoga, and much more that can help you create additional comfort in your body and in your mind. Each one of the tools mentioned in this book has some evidence base for using it. So if you're interested, I'll put a link in the show notes. And then the second thing is we talk about energy healing and perceiving the energy field in this episode. Well, I have a 10-session course on my website, you might already know that, on developing everyday intuition. But one of the modules is all about sensing the energy field, not only being able to perceive the feeling, but learning how to detect information and perceive information intuitively that way as well. So if you're interested, it's worth checking out. The course is based on or derived from my Insight Timer audio-only course, but this one actually has additional video content, printed information, additional meditations, and more. If you're interested, check it out. It's pretty reasonably priced, but if you're a listener of this podcast, you can get an additional $5 off of the course, and I'll put the promo code and the link to the course in the show notes as well. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was interesting to you. I love spending time with you, and that's about it for today. But as always, please know that I wish you all the very best. And of course, if you enjoy the episode, please remember to like, share, follow, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. It really does help me continue bringing more interesting content to you. And as always, until next time, be well.